that process is intended to be one of transparency, so that lessons can be learned, not one of blame.
Right.
I must stress, because otherwise there can't be improvements made, because there would be a tendency for the organisations involved to
cover up, I presume, and keep it from
not cover up, but maybe not fully engage, perhaps.
Let's return to Washington, the plane crash of yesterday, and consider where we are with the various reports of what might have gone wrong, and the commentary that has come out of President Trump's mouth. On the line is the aviation journalist Sally Gethin. Sally, what is the latest we know of the various theories of what could have gone wrong? There does seem particular focus now looking at air traffic control.
Yes, air traffic control really is coming under further scrutiny. There are questions about were there enough controllers in the first place, and also the fact that the work activity fell to a single controller. In other words, normally that two controllers would be working. One would handle the military traffic, in other words, the helicopter in this crash, and the other would handle civil or commercial traffic, which was the American Airlines flight. The question of that, and was it a workload issue? And of course, the backdrop to that is that there are a lot of problems with air traffic control in the United States. It's done very well so far, but there have been some incidents over the last couple of years. Also questions about going back to the helicopter itself, its situational awareness, its visual awareness. It should have been 200 feet maximum altitude. Instead of that, it was at 400 feet. How could that be? It should have passed underneath that passenger jet.
Is that something that, again, that the air traffic control would have had a role in directing or making sure that, do planes and small light aircraft and helicopters, do they put themselves where they're told to be, or do they have autonomy about where they can move?
My understanding is that they are told where they need to be. But having said that, Captain Sully, the very heroic airline pilot behind Miracle on the Hudson, which landed an airliner successfully on a river, has been talking about the role of the river and the Potomac and visual awareness in Washington, D.C. Overnight. And he has been saying that that the helicopter pilots should have had control in the sense of visual awareness. And that visual awareness is very difficult with all the different lights, and the fact that the river removes some of those lights at that point, that it's not such an easy environment to navigate. There's also a question about the pilots in the helicopter using night goggles, which could have also restricted their peripheral vision in the helicopter.
Oh, so it may have actually been a bad thing to have on. You'd think it would help them.
Well, night goggles is a new one to me, I'll be honest with you. But I think there's, unfortunately, there is a tendency to rush to conclusions at this stage, and a sort of a blame game. And these investigations take a really long time. There'll probably be at least a year before, the full report makes its conclusions. Or what happens is, with these investigations, they follow guidelines set down by a UN agency called ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. And then what happens is all parties arrive on scene and get involved. As we've seen, it will include the airline concerned, as well as the NTSB. And an early preliminary report is usually revealed about 1 month in, and then the real work goes on for much, much longer. So, But
has Donald Trump changed the timescale of that, given he's shooting from the hip and already reaching for his own explanations or theories as to what went wrong? It is really unorthodox for political leaders and those officials to start speculating ahead of investigations concluding, even initial conclusions.
Yeah, I agree with you. This president has set a precedent, if you like, in terms of the actual you know, the response to an incident of this magnitude. That doesn't mean to say that he isn't stricken by it, which he did reveal yesterday, but it may put some more pressure on the teams involved. Having said that, this is a very well-defined procedure, like I said, and the United States itself is the leading aviation industry around the world. It has the most flights, for example, and that process is intended to be one of transparency, so that lessons can be learned, not one of blame.
Right.
I must stress,
Yeah.
because otherwise there can't be improvements made, because there would be a tendency for the organisations involved to
cover up, I presume, and keep it from.
Not cover up, but maybe not fully engage, perhaps. So that process has to be allowed to continue, but it's clear that the president is taking a very a very involved role, a very involved interest, a very keen interest in this investigation, not least because it took place right on his own doorstep, so to speak, in the heart of the nation's capital.
Talk to me about the US airspace itself, and I mean, particularly around cities, the capital, DC, New York. I mean, it's really quite different to ours. There's a lot of small aircraft, there's a lot of private helicopters and planes.
In fact, I myself have personal experience. I regularly have flown in the past in and out of what has been known as Washington National Airport, now Ronald Reagan National Airport. You're absolutely right. It's a hub of activity. It's very, very busy. The same can be said of most major metropolitan areas in the United States. Chicago O'Hare Airport, Chicago, New York City. The lower airspace is much busier than in UK cities. That's because air transport, air travel is the preferred mode of travel in many, many ways. And it has to be managed effectively. And Washington, D.C. Is particularly busy. I think what kind of complicates it, if anything, is this runway system which borders the Potomac River. It's akin to London City Airport in London, except it's just a single runway in the heart of London. But there, it's a configuration of runways. I should add, there's a question mark about, the use of that additional short runway that the flight that was involved in the crash was directed to use. It's quite it's not a headache, but it's sometimes a bit of an extra burden on airline pilots flying that on final approach, because if you recall that pilot was asked to change the use of change runways before final approach, and that was because they had another major aircraft departing on that main runway at the time. That's not to say that the airliner, the American Airlines flight wasn't flying exactly correctly yesterday in the first place.
Well, a lot of details to emerge. Sally Gethin, thanks very much for the insights and updates on that story.